Hello and welcome to week 3 of Introduction to the Philosophy of Religion. This week we're going back to where it all began, creation. Many religions have a creation story which explains how the world came to be. In this segment we'll go back to the book of Genesis, which contains the creation story for Judaism and Christianity. And we'll also go back to the Quran, which contains the creation story for Islam. The main question we'll be asking is what is meant when it's said that God created the world? And by world I mean universe. Does it mean that the world was created from nothing? Or does it mean that the world as we know it was created from some pre-existing material? As we'll see, a definitive answer to this question is difficult to find in either the book of Genesis or the Quran. And that's led some to endorse creation from nothing, and others to endorse creation from some pre-existing material. Broadly speaking, the idea that the world was created from nothing is the one that has been most popular amongst Jews, Christians, and Muslims. But it has not always been that way. The idea of creation from nothing took some time to become properly established in Judaism, for example. So while some early Jewish groups seem to have gestured towards it, it's only in the 5th century that we start to see in Jewish writings unambiguous evidence of belief in the doctrine. The earliest Christians didn't accept creation from nothing either. The doctrine started to become commonplace only in the late 2nd century. Creation from nothing was also rejected by some prominent Muslim philosophers, such as Averroes, who we met last week. Today, creation from nothing is the most popular view in all these 3 religions, but there are people in each religion who reject the doctrine in favour of creation from pre-existing material instead. And in this segment, we'll look at some of the reasons behind the different views. So let's start with the book of Genesis. In many English translations, the opening line of Genesis is this: "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Now on the surface, this might look pretty straightforward. There doesn't seem to be much room for doubt about what is being said. The heavens and earth were created and created by God. But things are not as straightforward as they seem. For one thing, there's no mention here of nothing or nothingness. In other words, the text doesn't say that God created the heavens and the earth from nothing. We might expect it to say exactly that, if that was the intended meaning. But it doesn't. Still, we might think it doesn't matter if the text doesn't talk explicitly of creation from nothing, because creation from nothing is surely implied here anyway. We might think that to say God created the heavens and earth just means that these things were created from nothing. But is creation from nothing really implied here? Think of how we tend to use the word creation. We talk of creating a table, creating a poster, creating a website. In each case, the idea is that we're making something that didn't exist beforehand. But in each case, we're doing this using materials that did exist beforehand. In creating a table, we might use wood or plastic or metal. For a poster, we might use paper and pens, and for a website, we use a computer and some code and perhaps some images. What we might glean from this is that creating something usually means bringing it into existence using materials that existed beforehand. The materials used are not created in the sense of being brought into existence from nothing. They're already there, and we simply use them to shape or craft something that we didn't have before. So when we humans create something, this is how we do it. We don't bring the raw materials into existence from nothing. Instead, we just work with what's already there. And it's the same with animals. Birds might create a nest, but they do it using twigs and bits of moss that they find. So in everyday examples of creation, this is how it works. Pre-existing raw materials are used to make something new. And this might make us wonder whether the book of Genesis is describing a similar process when it talks of God creating the heavens and earth. So we have two possible ways of understanding the reference to creation in the book of Genesis. First, that God's creation of the heavens and earth involves creating them from nothing. Or second, that God's creation of the heavens and earth involves creating them from pre-existing materials. And the question is, which of these is actually expressed or intended in the book of Genesis? And this is not an easy question to answer. Obviously, it's not going to help to go back to the statement that God created the heavens and the earth in the hope that its meaning will just become clear if we stare at it for long enough. But what if we went back to the original language, Hebrew? Would that help clear things up? Well, yes and no, as we'll see. In 1964, a specialist in Hebrew called Speiser produced a new translation of Genesis as part of a series designed to produce an exact translation of the whole Bible. In this scholar's translation, the opening lines of Genesis are these. When God set about to create heaven and earth, the world being a formless waste with darkness over the seas and only an awesome wind sweeping over the water, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Now this translation puts an entirely different spin on things. In this version, it's clear that to begin with, there already was a world, and it was a formless waste. God didn't bring this formless waste into existence, but instead worked with it to make the things we know. On this translation then, creation doesn't involve God bringing the world into existence from nothing, but rather, God would just give form or order to what previously didn't have it. So this is creating in the sense of shaping, forming, fashioning, moulding, which is arguably how we normally use the word. If Speiser's translation is right, the world has always existed, like God, but is only ordered because of what God did to it. Speiser explains why he thought the passage had to be translated this way, but unfortunately his explanation involves very complicated technical details of Hebrew grammar. But he also offers a different reason for thinking his translation is right, and this one is worth considering. So first of all, look at his translation alongside a standard English translation of the same passage. Focus on the left-hand side of the table, the standard translation. Speiser points out that something very interesting is going on with the standard translation. He notes that it involves God creating the heavens and the earth in a formless state. God creates them in a formless state, which then needs immediate attention. And this suggests to Speiser a pretty bad initial performance on God's part, as though the creative act involved popping raw material into existence, which then needed further work to get it into the state desired by God. And this makes you wonder, if God was indeed creating from nothing, why not just create matter in the desired state right from the start? And this is worth thinking about. Suppose you had the ability to create a house out of nothing, for example. Would you first create the bricks and other materials out of nothing, and then arrange them into a house? Or would you just create the house exactly as you want it from nothing? Presumably you'd do the latter. It just seems to make more sense because it's more economical in terms of your time and effort. Anyway, this issue suggests to Speiser that something is wrong with the way the first passage of Genesis is usually translated. The standard translations make it look as though God took two steps to get the world into the right shape. So first, bringing the matter into existence, and then second, ordering that matter. So on the standard translation, it takes two steps for the world to get it into the shape wanted rather than just one. And Speiser notes that this problem doesn't arise with his translation, which obviously has a very different way of looking at creation, where God merely gives order to the raw, formless matter that already exists. Other recent translations by specialists in Hebrew give a similar result. For example, a Jewish translation from 1981 gives us the opening lines of Genesis as this: "When God was about to create heaven and earth, the earth was a chaos, unformed, and on the chaotic water's face there was darkness. Then God's Spirit glided over the face of the waters, and God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light." And again, in this translation, there's no ambiguity about what creation involves. It's clear that it involves God bestowing order on the chaotic, unformed earth that already exists. From this translation, it would be very difficult to arrive at the idea that God created the world from nothing. Yet, of course, creation from nothing has been widely accepted by Jews and Christians for much of their history. Why is that? Ultimately, creation from nothing became the established doctrine not because of any biblical passages, which are at best consistent with the doctrine rather than explicitly in favour of it. No, creation from nothing became the established doctrine because of problems perceived with the alternative view, namely creation from pre-existing matter. For if matter did indeed pre-exist, then it can be said to be eternal, without beginning and without end. And this looks to put it on a par with God, to make it in some way equal to God, who of course was also thought to be eternal as well. Also, if God has to work with pre-existing eternal matter, then this would constitute a restriction on God, because the eternal matter would in effect dictate the means by which God brings about the world as desired. And this was seen to conflict with the fact that God is almighty. Surely a genuinely almighty being would not be restricted in this way. So creation from nothing was seen as the better doctrine, in that it supported a more desirable notion of God, where God was seen to be without equal and truly sovereign, not capable of being thwarted or hampered by having to work with pre-existing matter. So that's all we need to say, I think, about Judaism and Christianity. Let's turn now to Islam and see what is said about creation in the Quran. The Quran contains many statements about God creating the heavens and the earth. So I've pulled 5 of them out and displayed them there. While all of these passages are clear that God created the heavens and the earth, we might wonder, again, what kind of creation is meant by this? Is it creation from nothing, or is it creation from some pre-existing material? These passages, and other ones, have often been cited by Muslim thinkers in support of creation from nothing. And interpreting them this way was made easy because by the time of the Quran, Jewish and Christian thinkers were routinely claiming that God's creation of heaven and earth was a creation from nothing. So the idea was well known to early Muslims, and they accepted it as capturing their own doctrine of creation. But looking at the passages themselves, some of them are certainly suggestive of creation from nothing, but they all stop short of unambiguously stating it. And modern day scholars have noted that in the Quran there is no explicit reference to creation from nothing. The passages that we've seen can certainly be considered to be consistent with the doctrine of creation from nothing, but it's far from clear that they explicitly state it. Now, last week we looked a little bit into the work of a 12th century Islamic philosopher called Averroes. Now, he made exactly the same point about creation from nothing not being explicitly found in the Quran. He said it's not stated in Scripture, that God was existing with absolutely nothing else. A text to this effect is nowhere to be found, he says. In other words, the Quran does not explicitly state that there was a time when only God existed, which is what would have been the case if God had genuinely created from nothing. Averroes also argued that there was evidence in the Quran that creation was not from nothing, and that there was in fact some pre-existing matter, out of which presumably God made the heavens and earth. So consider the two passages on the bottom of the screen there. First one talks about God creating the heavens and the earth in 6 days, his rule, but usually that's translated as throne, extends over the waters. And the second refers to smoke, which appears to be there before creation. Now in the first passage, Averroes reads it as implying that there was a being before this present being, namely the throne and the water. In other words, before there was the world as we know it, there was something else in existence, and that something being the throne and the water. On the second passage, Averroes suggests that the passage implies that the heavens were created from something, presumably that pre-existing smoke. Needless to say, other scholars have drawn different conclusions from these passages, and there has been no consensus about whether the idea of creation from nothing can be elicited from the Quran or not. Those who say that it can tend to point to passages about God's creation of the heavens and the earth, though as we've seen, these are more suggestive of creation from nothing than explicit statements of it. So what have we discovered then? Well, we know that the doctrine of creation from nothing has won widespread support from Jews, Christians and Muslims. But we also know that not all of them have endorsed it. Some have claimed that God instead created from a pre-existing matter that was not itself created, and so is eternal. We've looked at some key passages from Genesis and the Quran, which are often used to support either creation from nothing or creation from some pre-existing material. And what we've seen is that there's a lot of debate about how the passages should be understood, there's different views about what the actual words are and about what they mean. So the issue is very far from simple. In the next segment, we'll look at how two African traditional religions, namely those of the Akan and the Shona, have understood creation.